All right, so let's talk about upresing it. Now we saw, or at least on my computer, it didn't take that long. I think that whole thing took about 10 minutes to do everything. So the actual sim itself, like the normal sim, not the proxy sim, it looks like it went from like 820 to 823. It took 3 minutes. So that's what we wanted. The proxy sim itself probably took even less time. Looks like it took about a minute. So the point is, we can probably afford more resolution on the proxy sim. You could probably keep it the way it is, but if you can afford it, why not? Again, if we could just do the whole high res sim for the entire 96 pre-roll proxy thing, we would do it. But we can't, so we won't. But the point is, we can afford more. So I'm going to say, in the proxy sim, let's make that be 0.02, which is, of course, what our regular sim is right now. But our regular sim is what we're about to change anyway. Our regular sim is now 0.01. Now, anytime you have this number, it doubles the resolution in a given axis, like in the y-axis. There's now twice as many on top of each other. But that's true in x and z as well. So you have 8 times as many particles now. That's a lot more. So just be aware of that as you do this kind of thing. And just to demonstrate, you can see we now have 6 million particles when before we had 755. So that apparently times 8-ish is the other number. So for many of you, this is going to be the end of the road in terms of resolution. This is going to take up, with all the other stuff that the dynamic solver has to do, it's not just keeping those particles in memory. It's a whole bunch of stuff. It is, so if I go to the second frame here, you'll see, come on. Well, anyway, I'll just start saying, oh, there it is. There's all these volumes it has to keep track of. The collision volume, the pressure one in particular, the velocity, some other stuff like collision index and surface index, and who even knows what that does. I don't even know what that does. There's a lot of other stuff in here that it has to keep in memory. So it ends up taking up quite a bit of RAM. So for a 16 to 32 gigabyte computer, you won't be able to go any higher than this. But if you want to go to 0.005, you will need to have probably a 128 gig computer. Just because, again, if a simulation took 10 gigs, who cares? On a 16 gig computer, who cares about 10 gigs? But if you go to 005, it's times 8. So now it's going to take 80 gigs. So all of a sudden it matters quite a bit. Just to get one more step up the ladder there. The point is, we will content ourselves with 0.01 for now. So we updated the particle separation on the main one, on the proxy one. What else we got to do? This is your last chance, if you didn't do it already, to have your vorticity attribute on and your rest attribute on. As we increase, and this is an unfortunate thing about Flip, also about other simulations, but especially about Flip, the behavior of your sim will change from resolution to resolution. It won't change drastically, maybe from one to the next, but it will, like from one step to the next, but it will change. One of the main downfalls of Flip is that when the voxels get smaller, when we make our particle separation smaller, the voxels in turn get smaller, because as you recall, the grid size is a multiplier of the particle separation. So the voxels necessarily get smaller. Now what's not changing is how fast the particles are moving through those voxels. So as the particles are still going to be moving, let's say approximately 2 in the x direction, there's way more voxels they have to pass through now. And due to technical reasons that I won't get into right now, the pressure projection, the actual thing that says that water should flow around things, is the pressure, it particles can get under-resolved, and they will kind of start to disappear from the sim. So as we go up in in the resolution, we can actually lose volume in our liquid over time. So that's a bummer, because we have to do things to counteract that, which make the sim take even longer, or at least only a little bit longer. So for one of those things is applied particle separation. So turn that on whenever you're doing a higher res sim of any kind. This actually doesn't take that long for it to do. You can see in its little description, you can see particles end up closer together than their p-scale. They can't be separated. This results in the fluid compressing over time. Applied particle separation, unfortunately, won't actually fix that problem. It only helps somewhat. At this scale, it should be enough. If you do have a 128 gig machine and we go up to the 005, this won't help anymore. It'll help, but it won't be enough. And we'll talk about how to combat that later on. It's actually not too bad. There are several different approaches. Each of them has its own problem, but one of them is not so bad. Anyway, so turn that on. There's this droplet thing. I don't really like using it. It can delete droplets or control the velocity of them. I find that we won't need that so much. This is more important like if you have like a whale breaching in the ocean and lots of little droplets fly up and then come back and hit the sim. You don't want little droplets to make like big waves and big splashes. Each one of these particles represents like several cubic centimeters or inches of liquid. So while you might think that it's just a droplet of water, it's actually pretty big. So detect droplets can kill those. Man, lots of sirens today out there. Anyway, reseeding we talked about in the previous lesson, where it's trying to create more particles in a given voxel if it goes below a threshold, and it kills particles in a given voxel if it goes over this threshold. It's trying to maintain about 8 per voxel. These defaults are pretty good. They don't usually need to be changed unless you're doing like really viscous sims and things like that, but we're not doing that. So that's pretty much it there. I would say the last thing I would mention is the substeps. It's 1 to 2 right now. It's probably going to choose 2 most of the time. Again, it chooses this based on how fast the fastest particles are moving and how many voxels are going through. Spoiler alert, this is one of the ways that you can combat the volume loss, but again, this will also kind of change the behavior and feeling of the sim, so I try to keep that at 2. You can usually get a good result with it at 2 anyway, so let's not make the sim take any longer than it needs to. Under volume motion, there's solver here. Some of our more solvery things are here. Again, lots of stuff that can be kept at the default, but OpenCL. This is always a thing people ask about. Can I use OpenCL with my sims? The answer is actually probably. I just mentioned that a like 0.005 sim is going to take 80 gigs. And that is true for all of those fields together. But the OpenCL thing only actually works on one field at a time. And specifically, it works most well at accelerating the viscosity and pressure fields. So we're not doing viscosity, so you can just throw that right out right now. It's just pressure, really, that will use the OpenCL acceleration. So if you have a fast GPU, if you don't have a fast GPU, this might end up slowing you down. But if you have a fast GPU that has enough RAM on it, VRAM, I guess, or GRAM? GPU RAM? I don't know. If you have one that's fast enough, turn it on. Simply, you might as well try. If you turn it on and you start getting error messages that say CL buffer, Q, or whatever, or kernel, CPU, or OpenCL, whatever. If you get error messages, then that means you probably don't have enough RAM, or your GPU doesn't work for some other reason. Then just turn it back off again. So keep that on if you can. It will help. I'm going to keep it on, and I think that's about it. So you can either delete your caches, or you can just keep the version number being the same thing, and then just overwrite them. So that's it. I'm just going to overwrite mine, and we'll see what happens. and then we'll move on to rendering. This will be actually probably be the last thing we do for the liquid simulation stuff itself, unless we go to the super high-res one later. So node by node, render. Make sure you check node by node. If you close Houdini and open it again, it'll switch back to being frame by frame. So watch out for that. All right, so I went back to the liquid cache area to look at the liquid surface result, and there it is. So you can see how from frame 1 it's already going pretty much the same way that's going to go, but the more detail comes out because it's a higher res sim now. And we do still need some pre-roll to get to that phase, but 48 frames once again seems to have done a pretty good job. So hit play it now. There you go. It's very consistent. This is what we want. We want it to be consistent. I mean, rivers don't just wildly change their shape all the time from second to second. They kind of look the same the whole time. I mean, there's little waves here and there, but by and large, it's pretty good. So that's pretty cool. Again, this might be the resolution, the maximum resolution you get to, depending on how much RAM you have. If not, we'll do the higher thing later. But this is good enough to start rendering for.